Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Introduction to Grant Writing. My name is Sarah Earhart. I'm the Director of Community Investments at United Way of North Central New Mexico. This workshop today is the first of what we hope will be a series of workshops to provide tools and capacity building resources to our local nonprofit community. Our next workshop will be about centering equity and what does that mean. It's scheduled for January 17th, so if you're interested, please register on our website. After our meeting this morning, I will be sending out a copy of these presentation slides, as well as a link to a very short survey to provide feedback on this session. Just because of the size of the group we have today, please do keep your microphone muted and save your questions for the end. We've planned on plenty of time to answer those, or you're also welcome to put them in the chat box, and I'll keep a list of those for when we get to the question period. So without further delay, I am happy to introduce our presenter for today. Talal Saint-Lôt is the founder of New Mexico Grant Administration. He has many years of grant writing and administration experience with federal and state programs, as well as private foundations, and has helped local agencies and nonprofits secure over $100 million in funding throughout his career. So Talal, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone could hear me okay. Just a thumbs up is perfect. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all for joining this morning. And thank you, Sarah, Trish, and the United Way team for inviting me to put on this first workshop of hopefully an awesome series for you all. It's good to see everyone on this call. My name is Talal. I'm with New Mexico Grant Administration. I won't go too much into introducing myself. Sarah has already done a little bit of that. You could find out more NMGA site at .com. But basically, we're a full service grant consulting company, and we work with nonprofits, local governments, so counties, towns, cities, as well as some state departments, as well as tribal entities. We help with grant funding in terms of securing grant funding, as well as grant administration. And you'll hear me say throughout this workshop, and I'll start it off now with grant writing is the easy part. And that's sometimes that's kind of our motto when we first meet our clients. A lot of times, you know, grant writing and getting the money is the main goal. But grant world is huge, and there's so much more involved. So I'm looking forward to providing some good information and some tools that you could take away with you this morning, and hopefully be able to use to secure the funding that your organization needs and navigate the grants world in a more strategic and knowledgeable way. So let me go ahead and get my presentation ready real quick. Hopefully everyone could see the screen. Awesome. All right. So like I mentioned, really this morning is to be the idea is to be really short and quick on my end. My goal is to provide some initial tangible tools, and really to give you all an opportunity to ask some questions for us to get into any detailed information or things that you might have, needs that your organization might have, that everyone else can learn from. So this is the agenda. I'm going to cover 5 general topics with the hopes of providing you something tangible, like I said, to take away from this hour, so that you can use for years in the future. You'll notice that all of these topics, none of them really have to do with writing. That's because, like I mentioned, writing is the easy part. It's only about what we like to say 10% of what you need to be successful in leveraging grant funding for your organization. So during the next 20 minutes or so, I plan to cover strategies for identifying the right opportunity, tools to be able to search for and find those opportunities, as well as ways to determine which opportunities are meant for you. And then, of course, how to create a plan of attack once you have find that grant opportunity that you want to go after. And then finally, I'll provide a few tips and tricks that you could take away with you that might help you along the way. So the first one is going to be identifying the grant opportunity. So to do this, really what I wanted to do is paint a picture of the entire grants world, depending on where your organization at in its growth, in its life. Certain types of funders might seem more attractive to you than others. And so I'm starting here with the federal government, which is probably the largest grant provider in the U.S. at least. A lot of our large projects that happen here in the state, infrastructure-wise, are all federal funding. So all of our roads, most of our water infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, most of those things are funded by the federal government through grants. A lot of times those grants might come through the state and go through various departments through the state. So you might find yourself applying through what they call pass-through entities. And so that's with the federal government. And I'll talk more about those types of opportunities and the difference between those and, for example, working directly with the state. The state is sort of, if you're looking at it in a hierarchy, right underneath the federal government. And the state of New Mexico usually is passing through federal dollars, but nowadays, you might have noticed that the state's general fund is doing pretty well. The revenues, the oil and gas revenues are coming in, as well as GRT. And so the state's been able to provide a good amount of state-funded grant programs, spanning across different industries, whether it's education, healthcare, or environmental health. And so you working with the New Mexico Department of Environment or New Mexico Economic Development Department or the New Mexico Department of Health is sort of where you will find opportunities for all of those types of grants. And then finally, the last one is private funding. And this is what a lot of nonprofits use as their source of grant funding, typically, especially if they're smaller and newer. So moving from left to right, from private to state to federal, in the opposite direction is sort of what you would think of as, once you get the grant, how much work would it be for your organization to administer? And so a lot of times the private funding, the foundational level funding, are following nowadays trust-based philanthropy. So therefore, they're trusting the recipients to spend the funding appropriately and not obligating as much reporting requirements, things that collecting data and evaluating the programs to prove that they're providing a benefit or that they're actually achieving the objectives that you had planned. And so private funding is that's why private funding is the nonprofit's sort of go-to. Like I said, typically a smaller organization, I would always work with them and recommend reaching out to local foundations and local donor communities to obtain private funding to get their operations started. And once you're able to prove your model and really narrow down your logic model and the specific activities and programs that your organization is going to undertake, then it might make sense to move on to the state and the federal funding sources, which require usually a lot more work on the application side, but definitely a lot more work on the administration side, reporting programmatically and financially. So right now, I'll go through the resources for finding these types of opportunities that I was just mentioning. The first one is grants.gov, and then we have a State Department, New Mexico Economic Development Department. It's just one of the examples that I mentioned at the state level that do provide funding. And then, of course, there are some local organizations here in New Mexico that really focus on trying to provide and provide a platform to where others can be able to find out about the opportunities local here to the state of New Mexico. So Grant Plant, as well as New Mexico Grant Administration, have websites where and email listservs where they try to promote and try to get the word out on opportunities. And then I'll also walk through the IRS 990 search, which is another really cool tool that not many people know about that you might be able to take away with you. And then, of course, there are some paid services. So grants.gov, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with grants.gov. A lot of times when you log in, you kind of just close the website and leave because it's overwhelming and there's so many places to click and move around. But don't be overwhelmed with the website, and know that the federal government just recently updated grants.gov. So they made the search function a lot easier to use. And they just did this a couple months ago. So this is a screenshot of the search function for on the new grants.gov website. You'll see on the left-hand side, there's a lot less options than there used to be. And these are sort of the filters that you would use to be able to search for the particular areas that your organization is working in. The first one talks about opportunity type. And here you're going to be mostly looking for grants. And really you're looking for grants that are posted, not forecasted. So you just want to click the posted, not forecasted. That way you just have less results to go through. And then as you go through the other search criteria on the left, the most important ones really are you have the area that you might be working in, that you could select that, or you could also select the federal U.S. agency. So if your organization has already tapped into federal grants in the past and you already have an established relationship with a federal agency, then going by federal agency might be the best way. If you're not familiar with federal grants and really aren't sure which federal departments provide grant funding for the type of work that you're doing, then perhaps searching by program area or activity might make more sense. But grants.gov, again, is a great source, is the best source for federal grant opportunities. Again, these are a little bit of a heavier lift, both on the application side as well as on the administration side. Next, I just wanted to show you all the New Mexico Economic Development Department's website. They actually work with New Mexico Grant Administration. We work with them as well. EDD is an awesome resource for information, first of all. So this is their main website page. And what I did is I scrolled down and I took a screenshot of the bottom of their web page where it says stay informed, and you could put in your email address and sign up. If you sign up here, you'll be getting a I think it's monthly or maybe even bi-monthly newsletter via email. And that email will contain grant opportunities specific to the state of New Mexico. Some of them are private funding opportunities, some of them are federal funding opportunities, and some of them are state funding opportunities. We've been able to, New Mexico Grant Administration, we use EDD sometimes as a resource to find, our grant opportunities as well. So I highly recommend you going to their website, even if, you're on your computer right now, go over to their website. If you just put NMEDD in the search bar, it should direct you directly to it, and go ahead and sign up for their listserv. This is GrantPlant's website. I just wanted to give you a quick view of it. They have a grant watch every week where they'll send out opportunities, new opportunities. So those opportunities will cover, again, federal, state, as well as private funding opportunities. And typically, the GrantPlant and New Mexico Grant Administration, we try not to post the same opportunities. So I would use both of us as a resource. You'll notice that, like I mentioned, usually we'll use GrantPlant as a resource for different opportunities and try not to duplicate their work, and they do the same for us. And this one's the IRS 990 search. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this, but this is a great resource to find 990s of potential funders. So if you find a local foundation that funds projects or programs that are similar to the activities that your organization undertakes, then this is one of the ways for you to do research and find out that foundation and who they're giving funding to, how they're structured, those types of things. And so basically all you would do is, here it says search by employer identification number. You would click on that drop down, and then the next thing under that, it says organization name. So that's the trick, where you would just find the organization name or click on organization name, and then put in a search term. You could just put in the beginning of the organization's name, and it should populate. This is a national database, so the more specific you are in your search, sometimes the better results you get. But very, very useful, especially if you're not using paid services, right? Which are sort of the next thing that I was going to cover. There are, of course, some services that you can pay for, that an organization might invest in order to really take advantage of AI, of the internet search technology, to be able to be exposed to the maximized number of opportunities. So I've listed a couple websites here. The links are actually on here. So once Sarah posts this presentation, you'll be able to click on these links to go directly to the websites. But I just wanted to give you a quick, I guess, personal take on each of these. So Instrumental is one of the resources that New Mexico Grant Administration uses. We like working with them. They have a very personal touch to the work that they do. Sometimes on specific grant searches, we actually work with their account managers, and they perform the searches for us, and do certain things that maybe we didn't know in the background, to be able to find more opportunities in a particular area. Instrumental is awesome, to where you can sign up and have 5 projects that you're searching for funding for, and you could actually track those grant applications. So if you do plan to go after the application, there's an internal tracker there for you to be able to do that. So there's some project management aspects involved in that. Candid is another great resource. Candid is probably the longest standing resource. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Foundation Center. Foundation Center is back in the day before Google and all the the amazing searches that are available now. Foundation Center was the primary search tool for foundation funding, as well as government funding. Typically, at least when I was exposed to it, it was at the university. So normally it was universities is where you would have access to it. But now they've gone private, or I guess not gone private, but definitely evolved. And so they've changed their name. It's Candid now, and they provide subscription services as well. And again, they're a long-standing company that's been around for decades. Both of these services are paid services. The monthly subscription fee is pretty costly. It's about $200 a month. So it is a pretty hefty cost for those. And so it's definitely a tool that you would want to make sure is in line with, the growth of your organization, where you're at, and sort of where you want to go, if grant funding is a direction that you really intend to move towards. And then I added a couple other websites just to provide some other options for you to compare. Grant Forward and Grant Watch are some other online grant search websites that I don't think are as easy to navigate, as user friendly, but they are options that are out there that I figured might as well give you something to compare to. That way, maybe you could see how much easier Candid or Instrumental look. So next, I'll go through breaking down the opportunity, and I'll try to be really quick and brief here. Basically, once you find an opportunity, there's some really key items that you want to be able to draw from the opportunity itself. And the actual announcement is always going to look a little different. So you might have an announcement that is a federal announcement that's 80 pages long. You might have an announcement, for example, from United Way, that's 2 pages long, right? They're all going to contain the same information. FYI, the federal ones just repeat themselves, I think, 4 times in a row, with more detail and more detail each time. So if you look at the federal ones, just look at the first 10 pages, you should be able to get the information. But really, the most important information is, of course, the deadline, which provides you your timeline, right? So once you find the deadline, is this something that we could even go after? Do we have the time to do this? A lot of times grants do go on an annual cycle. So if there is a deadline that might be coming up, it might be something that you throw on your calendar for the next year. Mission, objectives, and priorities of the funding program or the funder are definitely one of the most important things to glean. Usually those things are right up front, right at the top of the grant announcements. And that gives you an idea of whether this is a funding opportunity that even you should continue reading, right? If the mission, objectives, and priorities aren't something aligned with the activities of your organization, I would just move on. There's so many opportunities out there. Really finding the ones that align with your organization will be the key part to being successful in an application. So don't go after the money or the amount or any of that stuff. It's really the deadline and then the mission. And then next, of course, is eligibility. So whether nonprofits are eligible. That's another search option on the grants.gov that I didn't mention. So you could actually click nonprofits there, and that'll give you all the grants that nonprofits are eligible for. Now, if nonprofits aren't eligible, I have seen several times partnerships form. So if there is an idea, if the deadline is good, the mission objective sounds right along the line of what you're doing, but then eligibility, oops, you need institution of higher education, or you need a government entity, or you need a tribal entity. maybe you're not eligible to apply, but perhaps you might have a program or you might be working with a partner that can. And so being able to figure that out, um, uh, tie up exactly what you're doing activity wise, what the partner is doing, and then presenting them with the opportunity and kind of talking through maybe a joint application where they would be the applicant, but of course you might be the implementer. So in that case, once they get the funding, they would kind of pass some of the funding down through you. Of course, there's a benefit to it because they would be getting a piece of that funding as well. Uh, Funding amount and performance period. So I put this as fourth because it shouldn't be your number one priority. The amount and how long the grant lasts should be secondary to the three things above it. So once you've gotten and checked off those three items, then looking at the amount, looking at the performance period, seeing if that makes sense with what your objectives are and what your funding strategy is. So the funding amounts will vary. For federal grants, they're usually a lot larger. And again, as you move through state down to private, the amounts get a little smaller. And so really you're looking at the amounts to see, is this something that will fund the program, or is this something that is worth the effort of applying for, administering, etc. And of course, the performance period is ties directly with that. As you're looking at your activities, your fiscal year, maybe it's a construction activity. Those making sure whatever you have in mind is that making sure that whatever you have in mind that you're able to implement it within the allowed performance period. So whether or not you could spend the funding. And then application components is sort of just a little part I put on here where you'll see on the example that I listed, I've just listed project abstract, project narrative, budget worksheet, project timeline, letters of support. These are just some of the things that are required usually from federal grants. But listing out these components really helps you get an idea of the scope of the application. A lot of times, again, people think, oh, I'm going to write an application, but a lot of times the application is collecting data, collecting information, filling out forms, filling out fields, making sure you have all of those done, getting letters of support, all of that. So being able to outline all the application components really helps provide a good view of what's happening and what would be required to be able to submit a complete application to that program. And then finally, I've listed the compliance and reporting requirements. Some funding opportunities might not list these and go into specifics. So sometimes it might require some additional follow-up on your part just to find out what those might be. But these are good things to know ahead of time. On federal grants, usually they do list all of these requirements. And what that does is it lets you know how much work you're going to have to do to actually keep this funding and administer the funding correctly in compliance with the donor, so that not only are you in good standing with them, but you could continue the relationship, the funding relationship with them. Maybe in the next round, they'll give you more money, that type of thing. But also, once you're able to do that, it helps you build the capacity to take on more grant funding. So really understanding those compliance and reporting requirements helps you find a good fit for your organization, so that you're not taking on something lower than what you can buy. And here we'll talk really briefly about creating an application development plan. So that outline that I provided before, let me just go to it real quick. So this is an outline that's very helpful for when you're gathering your application team. So let's say you find an opportunity, you think it checks all the boxes, then I would go ahead and create something like I put here on the slide, which is just a short kind of outline. It's a one-pager. right? Sometimes it might bleed over to 2 pages, but what that does is it provides, for example, maybe your boss, maybe some other teammates, other staff members. It'll give them some good information in order to have a team meeting to discuss the opportunity and discuss the strategy to move forward. And while you're doing that in that initial application development plan meeting, what you would like, what you want to do is develop an application development plan. And this might look differently. This is just a suggested format that we have. And basically, it's really simple. We just break it down by activity, responsible party, and then a date or deadline. And usually, what we do is we start at the bottom. So we'll start at the bottom and start at that deadline date, and we'll put in that information, who's going to submit it, etc. Or maybe we don't even put the people, and then we just start working up with what needs to be done. And the application components will help you know what that is. So if there's letters of support required, all that type of stuff, you kind of just go through the list and you develop your work plan and timeline. And then through discussions, you're able to identify which individuals would be responsible for those deliverables. And by doing that, you not only establish a plan that everyone understands and is on board with, even individuals, for example, like an executive director, maybe that might not be doing any of this work, but at least they know what's going on. And if something happens where something's getting stalled, they could help push it forward. And so that's related to, right, if you need a budget and you're needing some things from finance and HR in terms of salary, fringe rates, all those types of things, it kind of bleeds into those sorts of actions and details when you're actually developing the application. And then here's an application checklist. This is just an example of a checklist. Having a checklist is something that I highly recommend. A lot of grant opportunities, special federal grant opportunities, will come with the checklist. I recommend always creating your own. Sometimes their checklists don't actually follow with what needs to be submitted or what actually needs to be done. So developing your own checklist in Word or even a written checklist is something that would really help serve you as you go through the application development process. And you're able to ensure, once you're getting down to to the deadline, and the stress is up here and everyone's trying to make sure everything's there, you have a guiding document that helps you feel a little bit more confident that you've got all your T's crossed and I's dotted. All right, finally, this is the last slide. Just want to leave you with a few tips and tricks in terms of developing applications that we've learned along the way, that we hope is helpful for you. So of course, the first thing, plan, prepare, organize, delegate. We've gone through sort of the planning part of trying to see, really having a funding strategy for your organization, what direction you want to go in, and what types of funders might fit your type of activity and your mission the best. And then of course, preparing for that by doing your searches, maybe signing up with a paid service, and then once you've identified your opportunities and sort of what you want to go after, you have a list of potential opportunities that you want to go after, then organizing them, going through them, and then organizing your team and organizing the opportunity information into those one-pager outlines are the key to success moving forward. And then the last thing, of course, delegating. A lot of times, I mean, when I started, I used to do applications on my own. I've done applications for NIH, National Institutes of Health, to Department of Justice. And so I've always been someone that likes to work alone, but now I've definitely learned a team is much stronger than working by myself, especially when it comes to all the various skills and types of information that's required to put together a really strong grant application. So I consider myself a good writer. Writing's 10%. So now I need someone who's really good at math, who can help me with the budgets, someone who is really good at internet searching to help me find the data and statistics and information that I need. And then, of course, someone that really knows how to navigate relationships, navigate partners, organizations to get letters of support or letters of commitment or whatever that might be. So, really delegating the work, even though you might be taking on the overall application project, is definitely key to making sure that you're able to focus your strengths on what you can get done, and also making sure that the other components of the application are covered with experts that are able to deliver. And then establishing a relationship with the funder. So this goes across the line. So whether it's private, whether it's state or federal, establishing a relationship with the funder is key. However, I will say at the private level, it's probably most important. I've seen organizations have relationships with large funders, private funders. I'm sure you all have heard of, like Kellogg Foundation, and they have programs that have been funded for decades by Kellogg. And so once you're able to establish a relationship with a funder and prove your program and your project, and be able to work out any details or sort of intricacies with them, a lot of times that helps really serve as a excellent funding mechanism for nonprofits, to where the foundation is right for some of the work because they're sort of passing the money down to you. But you're able to do the work and not really worry about the administration, reporting, all of that stuff, because it's all mostly relationship based with the funder. The big thing with the private funders as well is I've noticed staff turnover isn't as high as when you move on to the state and the federal. And so, of course, relationships are usually comprised of individuals. And so working on those relationships, putting in the time and energy, I've noticed is definitely worth it on the private side. On the state and federal side, relationships are very important, but of course, those things can change very quick with elections, with staff turnover, especially at the federal level. If any of you have ever experienced federal grants, that happens all the time. So relying on relationships might not be the best when you're working with the state and federal government, although they are important. But on the private side, I think they are the key to success. And then on the actual application writing part, right? So 10% of maybe not even 10% of the presentation, I'll talk about actual writing. So of course, you're going to be responding to narratives, responding to specific questions within as part of the application process. Main tips I can give is to think about your audience. Think about who is going to be reading these applications and what would help them be able to do that easiest. So the first thing is they're going to be reading more than your application. So there's more than one application. So a lot of times being concise and short is the best way. I know when I used to review applications, the first thing I would do is go through the stack and then read the short ones first, just because it's easier, right, to get into the groove that way. And so by doing that, a lot of times the first ones might score a little higher because you haven't read the ones that you're comparing against. So just thinking about a strategy like that, and then also being able to provide the details that really touch on the specific question. And what I mean by details is statistics, numbers. You are telling a story. So really, you want your reader within the 2-3 sentences that you're writing to have a clear picture a clear idea of what you're talking about, even if it's just a few stats and some specific information. That usually is able to provide the reader, give them some tools, right, for them to use their imagination to think about what you're doing. Um, on this, in terms of being concise and providing the details, is certain applications will provide more direction than others. So, for example, if you're familiar with that's an awesome platform. FYI, New Mexico Economic Development Department and a few other state departments also use the same platform for applications. That platform is great because it has specific questions and you're able to answer those specific questions in an area. If you're looking at other state grant programs or federal grant programs, you'll notice that sometimes they don't have those specific fields, right, with the questions for you. So you have to do a little bit more work of doing that yourself. And so being able to outline directly from the notice of funding or the opportunity notice, teasing out those specific questions that they have. The best way to do that, I've noticed, is if the opportunity provides a rubric for the reviewers, that's what you want to follow. So if they tell you how the reviewers are going to be reviewing the application, that is the format that you should be writing your application. Why do I say that? Because again, you're thinking about your audience. I'm a reviewer. What's going to be easiest for me as I'm reviewing your application is as I'm scoring it. If I'm scoring it in a certain order and your application is in that order, then you've made that very easy for me. And so that's why I would recommend going by the rubric, the actual scoring rubric. And last, final tip and trick is to get an outside opinion. There have been times where clients have approached us with a full application, pretty much ready to submit, and they just want someone else to take a look at it, just to see if maybe they missed anything, especially if it's the first time applying for a federal grant, first time applying for a state grant. And we're able to provide some insights that might help them avoid extra work in the future. So especially when it comes to federal grants, there's so many complexities and things that you might want to think about, what you're proposing in your budget, how you're approaching certain questions, things that you might want to mention in terms of federal compliance with some federal laws and regulations, depending on the type of project that you're doing, all those types of things that we could help with. Grant Plant, any professional, that's very familiar with grants will be able to provide your organization that insight. I know a lot of times for us, if it's just a conversation, it's not something that you're paying for. So seeking that outside opinion, that outside advice is highly recommended, especially if this is your first time and you're not as familiar with the grant world itself. So I think that basically covers all of the slides and information that I wanted to share with you all today. I did want to keep it as short as possible. I think I've accomplished that. Yeah, about 15 minutes. So I wanted to open it up for questions and feel free to shoot, across the board. If there's specific situations that you've encountered, anything I think would be really helpful for the larger group to be able to learn from.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and expertise. We did have one question in the chat. When you were talking about telling a story, you mentioned typing answers into a platform. And I think your audio cut out right then. Could you restate what that platform was?
Sure. I apologize. I did get a few things saying my internet was lagging. So if y'all miss anything, let me know. But on that one, really what that was referring to was the submittable platform that United Way uses. I had mentioned that there are a couple state departments that also use the submittable platform. It's an awesome platform that's gaining a lot more traction, I've noticed, and that's specifically for the grant application. But what that does is it provides you as an applicant a lot more direction than the typical grant application would in terms of the narrative and what questions you need to be answering. So keeping in mind, if you're applying for something where they're using submittable or something where there's fields and they're already telling you this is what we want to know here, this is what we want to know here, that makes it a little bit easier. But a lot of times, especially at the federal level and the state level, they will not provide that specific outline, and you need to do that yourself. And it's highly recommended that you do it yourself, because that'll be the outline that you'll follow for your actual narrative.
We had another question. Should all applications, regardless of the funding agency or foundation, include statistics and data?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of a particular case where you might not. A lot of times there's always a place for you to put in some type of statistic or data related to your work, if you have any of that information. And what that does typically is it allows for the reviewer, you're not sure what their background or they might be coming to the table with, but what you're doing is you're with a specific statistics or data point, again, for them to use their imagination to be able to imagine your impact or what you might be doing as work. So that's really why I had recommended providing data and statistics, is that it provides tangible sort of information for someone to take and not just words, right? And for them, and so it also comes through as truth to the reviewer.
What local training programs do you recommend for people interested in moving into the grant writing space?
That's a great question. There aren't many grant writing, I would say, grant writing resources. So there is, through the University of New Mexico continuing education, there is a program through the Grantsmanship Center, which actually I've taken myself, which is very helpful, especially for someone who might be leading a nonprofit and looking to, explore the grants world and pursue some grant funding. They're an outfit based out of Los Angeles, California. They travel in, and I believe it's like a week-long workshop at the Continuing Education Center. And that workshop focuses specifically on developing a logic model, working with the activities that your organization is doing and telling that story. So that really helps you kind of establish some of those baseline things, like we were talking about, some of that data or information that might be really important for you to convey to your funders or to whoever you're applying for. That workshop really helps establish those things. I know when I was in a workshop, there was a gentleman from the Watermelon Ranch, I believe, that was in there, and a few other nonprofits, and they seem to really, really benefit from it. So that's the one that comes to mind that I know I could speak to. If you do a general search, there are a few grant associations. They're like national grant associations, but those are mostly for grant managers. Because like I said, grant writing is sort of just one part of it, a big part of the grants world is administering the grants and being compliant, especially depending on like what area you're working in, like what industry, education, healthcare, that type of thing. And so you will see that there are those things out there, but they're more focused on the grant management side, understanding the rules, 2 CFR 200, federal acquisition regulations, the FAR regulations, different things that maybe nonprofits don't really have to worry about as much.
And I think we can probably get in one or two more questions. And then if there's questions we don't get to, maybe we can include those answers when I send out the presentation. But how does trust-based philanthropy play into grant writing? And would that be considered private in the context of your presentation?
Yes, so trust-based philanthropy is 100% private. The reason why it's private is because otherwise, it's your taxpayer dollars. And so if it's going through the state or if it's going through the federal government, they they uh they have they're responsible for tracking those funds and for being able to report to Congress, ultimately, but really taxpayers, about how those funds are being spent and whether or not they're being effective. So there usually is a lot more less trust on the state and federal side, because of that aspect. Private funders uh, are moving towards trust-based philanthropy. I know this has been a huge thing for United Way, and a major direction that they're moving in. And really, what that does is it just simply provides the nonprofits, you all that are doing the work, a little bit more flexibility on the funding side. Uh, it doesn't necessarily take away any accountability or responsibility. It really just makes it it allows for a larger net of organizations to be able to apply, because trust-based philanthropy typically lowers the hoops that you have to jump through in order to be able to secure funding. And also it helps with, as you're administering the funding, there's usually less reporting requirements and less of a burden on your organization to do that. That way you could just do the work.
Thank you. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time this morning. If we didn't get to your question in the chat box, or if you have a question to ask, if you want to put it into the chat box or email me, we'll make sure to send those answers out with the follow-up to this presentation. And I want to thank you again, Talal, for giving your time this morning, sharing all of your knowledge, providing us with some great strategies as we move forward. And to everyone who took the time to join us today, thank you for joining us on this first workshop. You will be receiving a copy of the slide deck as well as a link to a survey to provide us with some feedback. So I hope you all enjoy your morning and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.